Hello, my friends. Today we'll start with the fact that young guys are leaving Ukraine in mass. Everyone between 18 and 22 is trying to get out as quickly as possible. That's why the lines at the border are extremely long.
Friends, for everyone who is currently planning trips toward the Ukraine-Poland border, please keep in mind that at all checkpoints the lines are incredible. You can get stuck for at least 8 hours, and in the worst case, even up to 20.
Friends, do you think they will return to Ukraine? Be sure to write in the comments. And here is Trump. Unhappy with Ukraine, saying that it wasn't Putin who refused the meeting, but rather that Zelensky and Putin failed to meet and reach an agreement. Allegedly, both are to blame. He just wants it all to be over, almost no matter how. Trump is unhappy with Ukraine. The US president privately expressed his dissatisfaction with Zelensky and with Europe, believing that their demands are unrealistic and that Ukraine needs to accept the loss of part of its territory in order to end the war. Trump is also unhappy that his high profile attempts at diplomacy had no success. Russia had almost backed away from its demands. Putin and Zelensky didn't agree to a joint meeting. The fighting doesn't seem to be nearing an end, and complete confusion reigns. In short, once again, Trump couldn't accomplish anything, and his brilliant plans aren't working. Also, the White House commented on the strikes on Kyiv.
General Keith Kellogg, the president's special envoy, has described these attacks as egregious. Do you agree with that description, and do you view President Putin as an impediment to getting peace between these two countries?
Well, it's not about if I agree, it's about what the president thinks. And I know what the president thinks because I talked to him about this. He was not happy about this news, but he was also not surprised. These are two countries that have been at war for a very long time. Russia launched this attack on Kyiv, and likewise, Ukraine recently dealt a blow to Russia's oil refineries. They have taken out, as a matter of fact, 20% of Russia's oil refinery capacity over the course of their attacks throughout the month of August. So the president is continuing to watch this intently, and this killing, unfortunately, will continue as long as the war continues, which is why the president wants it to end.
As can be seen, Trump is no longer surprised by these strikes and considers them as a normal part of warfare. Friends, share your opinion about this in the comments. At the same time, the White House also emphasized that Trump blames both Russia and Ukraine for the war.
Both sides of this war are not ready to end it themselves. The president wants it to end, but the leaders of these two countries need it to end and want it to end, must want it to end as well. And I think the president will make some additional statements on this later.
Now, let's move on to the situation along the front line. Today, I'd like to start right away with the Kupiansk direction, since all eyes are focused on the Pokrovsk, Dobropillia, and Kostiantynivka directions. Here, the Russians are gradually moving forward, encircling the city. And another breakthrough on the outskirts has even been confirmed. At the same time, the Russians have indeed entrenched themselves there, and today the fighting in the area of Myrne continues. The situation here is critical, and yesterday the Russians carried out assaults on Sobolivka. If reserves are available, then most likely in the coming days reinforcements will be sent here to stabilize the situation. But if they're not, and all reserves are tied up in the Dobropillia direction, then the Russians may be able to continue advancing here. So far, the Russians have managed to push forward significantly with breakthroughs taking place for several days in a row, and the battle goes on. In the Borova direction, The Russians haven't launched any new assaults yet, and the situation remains stable. In the Lyman direction, the Russians are assaulting Novy and Novomykhailivka, pushing through in the area of the village of Kolodezi, as well as in Zelena Dolina, and are storming Zarichne. And the activity is very high, but so far over the past day there have been no new advances. Meanwhile, in the Siversk direction, and the Russians managed to make significant gains closer to Yampol and Dronivka. The breakthrough was about 1 kilometer 800 meters near Yampol and 4 kilometers 300 meters in the Dronivka area. As a result, the situation here is gradually worsening. This will affect both the Lyman and Siversk directions. Just yesterday, a report emerged that the Russians were using aviation to the maximum in this sector, destroying all Ukrainian positions. And today we see confirmation and the results of those actions. The front has begun to buckle. At the same time, the Russians are pushing further toward Yampol, Dronivka, storming Serebryanka, advancing towards Siversk, and reports confirm assaults on Fedorivka. Step by step, the Russians continue to move forward. In the Kostiantynivka direction, the Russians are assaulting Plavni, pushing through the area of Shcherbynivka, storming Rusin Yar, and attacks are being reported on the fields near Poltavka. Over the past day, there have been no changes, but the activity remains high, and the Russians are gradually moving closer to Kostiantynivka. In the Dobropillia direction, in the area of Kucherev Yar and Zolotay Kolodez, the Russians are not conducting assaults, and it seems that the Ukrainian forces have managed to hold the Russian advance here. However, in the area of Volodymyrivka and the village of Mayak, fighting continues. Both sides are trying to push forward and turn the situation in their favor. As a result, fierce counter battles are ongoing, but so far there have been no changes along the front line. In the Pokrovsk direction, the Russians are assaulting Родинське, Красний Лиман, Новоекономічне, Балаган, Промінь, the outskirts of Мирноград, Лисівка, Новопавлівка, the outskirts of Покровськ, Удачне, Молодецьке, and are pushing through near Kotlene. As can be seen, activity here remains at maximum levels. However, so far, the Ukrainian forces have managed to repel all attacks, and over the past day, there have been no changes. In the Novopavlivka direction, the Russians are breaking through near Dachne, assaulting Filia, the outskirts of Ivanivka, pushing toward the village of Iskra, and near Voskresenka. Over the past day, there have been no changes either, and the Ukrainian forces continue to repel all attacks. But the situation remains critical. Local fighters describe the situation as follows. Currently, the Novopavlivka direction is very difficult. Our troops have tried to improve positions in certain areas, while the Russians continue an active advance on all other sectors. There are also areas with ongoing maneuver battles. In some spots, our forces have managed to push the Russians back. That was earlier limited counterattacks aimed at improving positions and preparing a more developed defense across 2 or 3 lines, so that when the Russians regained full initiative, our troops would be in a better position and there would be no major breakthroughs by the Russians. And now we are here. The Russians again have 100% initiative, and the terrain is unfavorable. If the Russians had already captured Novopavlivka, we would already be talking about the Pavlograd direction, where the open steppe makes defense difficult. Things would be very dangerous, but that hasn't happened, and our soldiers are doing everything possible to prevent the Russians from entering operational space. Clearly, the Russians will intensify attacks even further. Currently, the most dangerous area is the intersection of three regions, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk. There, the Russians are advancing and making significant gains. Considering that the Russian 76th Air Assault Division has been moved to Zaporizhia, it's not hard to guess why this sector is now a priority for them. Apparently, they are eager to break into the rear of our defenders in Gulai Pole. In the Velyka Novosilka direction, the Russians are assaulting Komushovacha, Zaporizke, and are pushing through past Tymyrivka. Over the past day, there have been no changes, but activity remains high, and the situation is extremely difficult. In the Zaporizhia direction, the Russians are assaulting Bilohirya and Stepnohirsk. There has already been video confirmation that the Russians have advanced far beyond Plavni, reaching the outskirts of Primorsk. Therefore, it's likely that the situation here is much worse than what is shown on the map. However, there are no official confirmations yet, so we're waiting. Still, it's already clear that the situation is gradually deteriorating. In the Kherson direction, the Russians continue shelling, but there are no new offensive actions. Over the past day, the front line hasn't changed. Now, let's move on to the situation at the border. In the Kharkiv direction, the Russians have stopped all attacks and the front line remains unchanged. In Vovchansk, fighting continues, although there have been no changes over the past day. In the Sumy direction, the Russians have again increased the activity, attempting to break through near Oleksiivka and Yunakivka, as well as across the border. However, over the past day, there have been no changes, and so far all attacks have been successfully repelled. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Merz stated that a meeting between Putin and Zelensky is most likely not going to happen.
We have problems that we can only solve together. And fortunately, one of them is Russia's war against Ukraine. Today, we need to address this issue again. And this comes against the backdrop of the fact that a meeting between President Zelensky and President Putin apparently will not take place, unlike what was agreed upon last week between President Trump and President Putin when they were together in Washington.
And that's all from me. So please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on all the latest news. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.